Welcome to this week's Space Startup News. So I do this live stream every week at the same time. So I'm going to recap the videos I've done and then I'll bring up comments people have left on the videos. And then I'll answer chat messages as well at the same time. And we have David in the house. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, going great. Just started my live stream. So thank you for joining. And that is the format. So first of all, let's bring up this banner. So we're on X at Space Startup Hub. So I post my videos on there. So if you're on X, you can follow me on that handle at Space Startup Hub. So with that, let's get into the first video this week. Bring that up. And that was on who wins the 2026 medium lift race. So this video is covering US space startups, and people have said in the comments, are you going to do Europe? Yes, I'm going to do Europe. I'm going to do Asia. And yes, I'm going to do Canada as well. So, but first of all, I'm starting with the US. So I think I cover something like five or six companies that are working on medium lift vehicles mostly. So let's go through the list, and then I'll read the comments at the end, see what people are saying, who's going to win, and who are their favorites and so on. So in no particular order, these are just the order I put the images on. So we have here Eclipse, which is a partnership between Northrop Grumman and Firefly Aerospace. So Firefly Aerospace are working on their Alpha vehicle. They've just recently done Flight 7, which was a return to flight. It's been a while since their previous launch, which failed. They fixed the issue and they've just flown their Flight 7. And now they're upgrading their vehicle, the Alpha vehicle, to a Block 2, but it's still a small launch vehicle. What you see here is Eclipse, which is a medium launch vehicle, and we actually have some stats here. So you can see it's got 7 Miranda engines on the first stage, and it can lift 16 tons, 16,300 kilos to low Earth orbit, and for geotransfer orbit over 3 tons, and actually to the moon over 2 tons. Translunar injection is 2,300. So I do say in the video, actually I've got another slide here. I do say in the video, it's this will likely be used for resupply of the International Space Station and future commercial space stations. And the reason is that Northrop Grumman has a Cygnus vehicle, which they have a contract with NASA to resupply the International Space Station. So they're going to move over to this vehicle to continue International Space Station resupply, and also the new future commercial space stations. So Starlab has already signed a contract with Cygnus, with Northrop Grumman for the Cygnus vehicle. So I expect Eclipse will be doing lots of those kind of missions. But in addition, it can do constellations and so on, and maybe even send things to the moon. So that's Northrop Grumman teaming up with Firefly Aerospace on this new medium launch vehicle, which according to the website is going to launch this year, which I'm kind of a bit skeptical about, to be honest. But they do have hardware. They've shown photos of the hardware being qualified and tested. The engines have been fired quite a few times. So maybe it will launch this year. I guess we'll find out. And this is actually from Wallops in Virginia, which is the same place Cygnus launches from. So that is the first vehicle. Let's move on to the second one. And this is Terran R. R stands for reusable. And this is from Relativity Space. They actually did launch a vehicle called Terran 1, which is a small vehicle. And that was like 85% 3D printed vehicle. And their whole idea was, we'll 3D print the entire rocket, or most of it. That was their business plan. It didn't work out because they couldn't 3D print medium-sized vehicles. There was always defects. The tanks would buckle, and it just didn't work. And they tried it for several years, but they pivoted I think it's probably October 2024, 2025. They basically got a fresh injection of cash from Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO. He took over the company. He's now the CEO, and they pivoted to a more traditional approach, which is they still 3D print the engines, very intricate parts on the engines, but the main part of the rocket, what's called the primary structure, the tanks, the fuel tanks, and so on, the interstage, that's now just produced by machining and welding and so on, and just the traditional approach using, I think, aluminium alloys and so on. So very similar to how SpaceX made their Falcon 9 rocket, and just 3D printing the engines. So if we look at the payload, it's quite a lot. It's Terran R is 23.5 tons to the low Earth orbit, and this graphic from them compares it to the other companies. I don't know why it's saying 15.8 tons for Falcon 9. I'm pretty sure that's more than that. It's more like 22 tons. But anyway, they can put quite a substantial amount of mass into orbit. So that is Terran R from Relativity Space, and it may be launching this year. We'll see, this year, next year, something like that. And also it can send in expendable mode 33 tons, which is a lot. So probably this will be used for orbital AI satellites, because Eric Schmidt is interested in orbiting data centers. He has been for a while. So now that's the kind of the big idea from all the launch companies. They all want to do data centers in space. We've got StarCloud, we've got SpaceX and Elon Musk. We've had a filing from Blue Origin yesterday for a large number of satellites for AI. NVidia is doing chips. So like this is the big thing from the space sector now, is AI satellites. And Relativity Space will be well positioned for that. So let's move on. This is Neutron rocket from Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab is probably the second most successful space launch company after SpaceX. In terms of launch cadence, the second. Yeah, and David just mentioned they just filed yesterday, I think. I don't know what the number was, but it was a very large number of AI satellites. They've just filed permission from the FAA, FCC, whatever. So that was like, everyone expected that. It's not a surprise to anyone. Blue Origin, they have their own launcher, so they're going to build their own data center. So this is Rocket Lab's medium launch vehicle called Neutron. And as you can see from the stats, they're not that clear, but its payload to low Earth orbit is 13 tons. Fairing diameter is 5 meters, which is pretty standard, 5.4, something like that. So this is not the most. For instance, Relativity Space is 23. So this is 13 tons. But most launches are not mass constrained. They're volume constrained. If you look at the transporter missions from SpaceX, they typically, even though they're launching 100 satellites, the mass is typically 5 to 6 tons. So 13 tons is plenty. So they'll be able to do the constellations, larger vehicles, landers, lunar landers perhaps. So 13 tons is pretty good, and it's a reusable vehicle. We have this graphic here. So there's 9 Archimedes engines, as they're called, on the first stage, and then they have the fairing, which is the Hungry Hippo fairing. So it kind of opens up, and then it closes and comes back. So the fairings are always attached to the first stage and return for reuse. The second stage will fly out. So it opens up, the second stage with an engine, and the payload flies out, and then the fairings close. So this graphic actually mentions all-out effort to get Neutron to the launch pad before the end of 2025. Blah 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 blah. So we're now into 2026, and it will be at the end of 2026, the earliest, and probably, I said in the video, 2027 before it launches. So Peter Beck, the CEO, said, we'll launch when we're ready. So definitely they're now in an intensive qualification and testing. They have the ground system. This is at Wallops. So this is Wallops, Virginia, on the east coast of the US. You can actually see, if you look at the bottom, this black water tower, that is the Neutron launch pad. If you go all the way down, you'll see the launch pad. And then further up, you have the Antares, you have the Northrop Grumman Cygnus resupply launch pad just to the north. So Eclipse will be flying from here, and then you'll have Neutron. And I think we have a video, bring that up, Rocket Lab, so you get a better idea. This is Neutron, and interstage, is it? Second stage. And yeah, that's one of the flaps. This is the fairing. You can see it's quite big. That's a Peter Beck. That's a whole team. That's the upper stage, I think. Testing the upper stage. And yeah, so what else did they do? Yeah, there it is. There's the launch pad being built. It's all done. That's all done now. The water tower. Archimedes is first stage engines. So that is Neutron. That's coming along quite nicely. So let's move on to, let's move on to Stoke Space. This is the latest render. Someone said in the comments, you're not using the latest renders. So here is the latest look at what Stoke Space looks like. So you've got the first stage, you've got the legs, landing legs, and then you've got the second stage. This vehicle is entirely 100% reusable. The first stage comes back to launch pad, and the second stage comes back to the launch pad as well. So I think we have some more slides. So this is the fairing. So this is quite low in terms of mass. It's 3 tons to low Earth orbit in reusable mode, 7 tons, I guess that's expendables, 2.5 tons to geotransfer orbit, and 1,250 tons to trans-lunar injection, which is to the moon, and 800 kilos to C3. This is basically the where you escape the Earth-Moon system. So it's basically you're right on the balance point between the Earth-Moon system and the rest of the solar system. So from that point, you can just go anywhere in the solar system. Tiny little nudge and you go to Mars or Jupiter or whatever. So basically, those are the stats, quite low, but it has very high launch cadence. If everything works, the second stage comes back, you do an inspection, there's nothing to replace, it's not using heat tiles. So a quick inspection is if everything's fine, launch it again and again and again. So potentially very high launch cadence, which is great news. But obviously they're using active shielding, which is new. They've got an Aerospace-like engine on the second stage, and they're using hydrogen and oxygen, which is always difficult to work with. So this is the second stage, and I think it's 24 engines, which are fixed in fixed position, and that's how the maneuver in space. And I think we actually have, this is an image of the second stage. They've actually tested flying it, lifting off, hovering, and then coming back to the ground. So they've actually tested the second stage in flight, as you can see there. And we have another image to understand how the steering is going to work, because this is the second stage. There's 24 engines and they're in fixed position. So how does it steer? And we actually have an animation just to see how it steers. Bring it up. So on the left, this is the traditional way you steer. You have an engine and it's gimbaled. It basically can move to generate thrust in a particular direction. But with fixed engines, what you do is you vary the thrust of the individual engines using software, and you can basically steer even though the engines are fixed, just by varying the amount of thrust from each individual engine. And it's equivalent of using a gimbaled engine. So that's how they steer. So that is Stoke Space. And let's finish with, have I covered everything here? Let's finish with Phantom Space, which I'm guessing a lot of people are not that familiar with. It's a small small company, but they have quite a bit amount of funding. They have an 8-figure sum, that's 10 million plus. Their vehicle is very low cost. They're manufacturing the primary structure, the tanks and so on, but they are not manufacturing the engines. They are buying the engines from, actually, so Greg Ledger is saying one engine with 24 nozzles. They have 24. Is it nozzles? Or I thought they were engines. But basically, you can see from this image here. Bring this image. This is what the second stage looks like. So you have these. Are these not engines? I thought. Anyway, so that is the second stage. Basically fixed. I call them engines. And then they use differential throttling to steer. So anyway, let's look at Phantom Space. So they are manufacturing the primary structures, the tanks and so on, but they're not manufacturing the engines. They're going to buy them from Ursa Major. This is why they're very low cost. They can quickly produce these rockets and just get the engines from Ursa Major. So they've got 10 million plus. I think it's quite a lot more than 10 million, to be honest. So this is the Daytona 2 rocket. And this is a graphic. This is a few years ago, but it says 450 kilos, but I think it goes up to 1,000 kilos. So still quite small satellite launcher vehicle. And they're saying $4 million per dedicated launch. This was a few years ago, so I'm not sure it's still 4 million. But anyway, this is Daytona. And I didn't include this in the video, but if we look at this image, this is quite a controversial image. I don't know if you remember this from 2021, but I don't know if anyone knows why this is controversial, but I'll say what the reason is. It's not a real photo. It's been faked. You can see here on the transport dolly what looks like it's the Daytona vehicle. It's the vehicle we just saw. Go back here. It looks like that vehicle, right? And you can see there's factory, there's workers, and there's a Phantom logo in the background. But this has been photoshopped. In fact, we have the original image. Here's the original one. And you can see this is actually a NASA factory. And this is the Orion launch abort system. So what they've done is they've taken this photo and they photoshopped this Orion LAS launch abort system, and they put their Daytona vehicle and they put the logo here on this wall. See? So they got caught out. I think it was Eric Berger who queried this photo and said something not right with this. So anyway, they did eventually apologize for this photoshopped image, and I didn't put it in the video because it's quite a few years ago. But I thought I'd bring it up in the live stream. So anyway, that is the North American companies, and I'll bring up the comments. So I will be doing. I won't just be stopping with North American launch providers. I'll be doing Europe. I'll be doing Asia, and I'll cover Canada as well. So anyways, we have Kako Genesis saying, the really interesting thing about Stoke to me is that the Nova design, that's the vehicle's called Nova, scales up, according to Andy Lapser, who's the CEO of Stoke Space. In other words, if things go well, they could possibly produce a much larger vehicle eventually. Imagine the second stage for 100 kilos to LEO Nova. What I would like to know is, where is the Stoke of Europe? There seems to be little ambition there among launch startups. Well, I'll be doing a video, or maybe 2 videos, because I've got quite a few companies in Europe to go over. It's and this is before I do the research. Maybe there's some I've not covered, but it's going to be a long big video, maybe in 2 parts. So I'll go over the European space startups. And then we have Magazine saying, are you also doing a European version of this kind of video? Yes, I will. Would you consider doing a video similar to this on European rocket startups? If you haven't, yes. Canadian too, and yeah. So that's Wayne's World saying doing Canada, and Mr. Barb 5932 Canada. Yes, I'm definitely going to do Europe. I'm definitely going to do Canada. So my plan is, originally I was going to add the Canadian companies to the European video, but that's already quite long, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do another bonus North American video. So I found maybe 2 other North American launchers, and there's a few more wacky non-traditional approaches that I can add to the US side. And I've got a number of Canadians, so it's still going to be quite a substantial video on North American launchers, and then I'll do, and then also I'll do the European one as well. So that's the new plan. So let me bring this up so I can read the last one. And RXKE saying Stoke could be such a major game changer. Their downmass capability could be used not only on Earth. So yeah, I absolutely agree. The technology they're using, 100% reusable, and an active shielding for the second stage could mean very high launch cadence, perhaps higher than SpaceX. So yeah, I'm very excited about Stoke Space, and hopefully they can get all the technology to work. So let's move on to some other comments. Planet X8570 saying, winners, Rocket Lab, innovative concept that builds on their boutique approach. Yeah, I think the engines are nothing special. I think Peter Becker said this. Just standard engines that are not bleeding edge, so they should be very reliable. They should be able to reuse them many times, and 13 tons is fine. That will cover most of the market, no problem. Stoke Space, they might run out of money before they find market fit. Huge rocket, needs constellation market share. Actually, as we saw with the stats, it's only, I think it's 3 tons in reusable mode and 7 tons expendable. It's quite small mass, but it does have very, very high launch cadence, hopefully. And losers, all the rest, building non-reusable rockets in 2026 is a non-starter. Well, Eclipse will eventually be reusable. They will roll out the technology for that. Relativity Space will be reusable from day one. Neutron is reusable. I mean, I think that pretty much all have some level of reusability. Stoke Space is 100% reusable. And then Blue Steel 8376 saying Relativity and Firefly's rockets are reusable. Stoke's rocket is not huge, it's rather small. Yeah. And then we have Abel Garcia L4Q saying, I like Rocket Lab Neutron because it reminds me of the James Bond movie where the rocket nose opens up. Yeah, it does. It kind of opens up. The second stage comes out and then it closes and then it comes back. So yeah, it's a very innovative concept. They've tested it, they qualified it. It seems to work. It works on the ground. We'll see whether it works in space. And then we have Blue Steel 8376 saying, what you said about having to fly a medium lift vehicle to be profitable isn't true. Rocket Lab would be profitable today if it wasn't for the cost of developing Neutron. Electron is a profitable rocket. And we have a response from Purple Bass. I'm not sure if that's true. Space Systems is 2/3 of the business. Maybe Electron is profitable. So let's get rid of that. And let's bring myself up. There I am. And David Chuang is saying reusability and optimized manufacturing will be the key to rocket success. Yeah, you have to have a reusable rocket in 2026. There's no question. I don't think you'll even get funded if your rocket is not reusable. Let me address the issue with Rocket Lab and small launch vehicles. If you are a pure play small launch startup, you are dead in the water. There is literally zero probability you will be successful. I don't think you'll even be funded. The only reason Rocket Lab is profitable is because they are not a pure play. They're diversified. They're not just launching electrons. They have the whole space system. They have ground system. They have supports. They support like Varda Space with their mission control, which they get paid for. And they're working on satellite buses and satellite components. they build all the satellite buses for Varda Space. They have buses for NASA and so on. So it's because they've diversified, they are profitable. It's not because they launch small rockets. If you launch small rockets and that's all you do, you will not make any money. So you have to pivot to medium launch vehicles, or you have to diversify to satellites. To SpaceX is diversified to telecommunications with Starlink. They make the money from Starlink, not so much from Falcon 9. So that's my opinion anyway. So let's move on to space, the space setup news this week. Actually bring up this one. So I covered a few stories. Yeah, and Neutron Rocket Lab just got not Neutron Rocket Lab just got a big contract with the U.S. military, I think Department of Defense. I think it's like 190 million for hypersonic testing. So yeah, there's quite a lot of money on the military side. You have Golden Dome, so there's a lot of money there. So on Space Startup News, we have Isar Aerospace, basically working on a mission with astroscale for orbital debris removal. We have NVidia working on a basically a AI system that works in space. Space qualified, low mass, low power, kind of, and low volume. That's suitable for orbiting data centers, but still high performance. And then we have the Lunar hotel getting some investment. So I think I've got individual. Yeah, let's bring up this one here. So this is Isar Aerospace. It's a European launch company, space startup. They've launched once. This is the very first launch. It lasted 30 seconds before it failed and crashed into the ocean. But the second launch is now very, very close. It was supposed to be last week because of weather and so on. It's now, I think, the 23rd. So maybe tomorrow or the day after. But in the next couple of days, they'll make the second launch attempt, hopefully. And they've got quite a few contracts, including one with Astroscale, which works on life extension missions, orbital debris removal, and so on. So they're working on ELSA-M. They will lift ELSA-M into orbit, and it will attempt to dock and deorbit a Eutelsat OneWeb satellite that failed, but it's still in orbit. So they're going to try and capture that and deorbit it. And the vehicle they're going to use is Spectrum, this rocket here. So that's good news. And we have an image of the launch pad. This is Andøya spaceport in Norway. It's very cold. It's very near the polar regions, and they Isar Aerospace have a dedicated spaceport here, and so hopefully they'll be launching quite a few times from here. I think they're building like 20 or 30 rockets per year. They've got a nice big factory now. They just have to get to orbit and prove the vehicle works, and potentially we'll be seeing lots of launches from this spaceport. So moving on, we had an investment in Grew Space, which are building a lunar hotel. This is their concept for a lunar hotel, and they have various different missions planned. First of all, they've got a tech demo in 2029. So they're a little CubeSat on a lunar lander, and they're going to test the technology, try and make some lunar concrete. They're going to scale it up. They're going to land near a lunar pit, and then put an inflatable habitat into the lunar pit. Then 2032, their first hotel, which will be an inflatable, four guests for week 2. And then the second hotel will be using lunar concrete. It will be much more substantial, and it can support up to 10 guests. And this will be mid 2030s. So they got the investment. I think it's $100,000. It wasn't a great amount of money, but it all helps. And we also had this story on. This is NVidia. This is the CEO of NVidia, I think, Jensen Huang. And he's talking about orbital data centers, and they're building silicon. This silicon is, I think it's called Space One. Vera Rubin module. And this is a space qualified piece of silicon that's perfect for doing your AI. And apparently it's 25 times faster inference than what you could normally do using space AI. There's already one, I don't know what they're called, a GPU. There's a GPU in space already, launched by StarCloud. This new one is way better. It's going to be 25 times better, and it's perfect for orbiting data centers. So NVIDIA is working on that. It's not available yet, but they're working with StarCloud, and I think they're working with Etherflux and quite a few other companies. So expect orbiting data centers the next 5 to 10 years. Everyone's doing them. Blue Origin now, and SpaceX, and Google's doing them, and StarCloud, and Etherflux, and probably some other companies as well in the future. And Dave is asking, how the heck is NVIDIA planning on red-hatting those modules? The thing is, I don't think that is the biggest issue, because Google have already said they've been firing very high particles at their TPUs, their tensor processing units, for their project Sunrise, whatever it's called. So they've been firing particles at it, and they reckon that their chipsets can last 10 to 15 years in that kind of environment. And they only need them to last 5 years. So I think they already have the technology to handle that. So I think that's definitely possible. I know SpaceX have also just got a cyclotron, so they can fire particles at their AI chipsets. So yeah, they're all working on that. The other issue is thermal waste. That's why you have a lot of radiators. So there's a few technical issues they have to work on, but I think they can solve all those issues, to be honest. So let's move on then to the final story this week, which is on orbital power grids. Pick that up. There it is. So this is a collection of space startups that are working on the concept of beaming solar power. So they collect solar energy in space and then beam down that power, that energy, to the Earth or to other satellites in space, and even to assets on the lunar surface. So I just collected, 5 or 6 of these companies together, and so let's just have a look at those companies. What prompted me was this new startup that's come out of stealth. Only last week came out of stealth. It's called Mantis Space, and you can see the concept here. They have all these solar panels collecting energy, and then they beam it down to clients. So they're beaming this down to other satellites in space. So not beaming it down, beaming it across to other satellites in orbit. And we have another render. There's not a lot of images and renders, but we have this one. So you kind of got a close up of the main payload, whatever, the satellite bus, and I guess these are laser beams or whatever, the laser beam system. So you got the solar panels, and then got all these beam directors which can beam the power to satellites, other satellites. So that is Mantis Space. We don't know a lot about it. They've got, I think, 10 million plus in seed funding, oversubscribed. So that is Mantis Space, and we have Starcatcher, which is doing exactly the same plan, which is collect power and beam it to other satellites. Starcatcher is 2 or 3 years older, so they're more advanced in what they're working on. And I think I may actually have a video so we can have a look at what Starcatcher's been doing the last couple of years. So this is the Moonracer lunar terrain vehicle for Intuitive Machines, and Starcatcher has been remotely beaming power to this vehicle. So there it is. There's Moonracer, and you can see at the back here it is. This can capture the beamed power, and there it is. There's the beam, and yeah, that's Starcatcher working on their lenses. That's it. There it is. You can see it beaming the power, and you can see here the amount of power that's going across. If you look, that 1 kilowatt. So this is like a record, world record. I think they got 1.1 kilowatts of beam power over a 1 kilometer distance. So this is a world record of beam power. So they're making progress on their system. Mantis Space is doing exactly the same kind of system. So let's see what other companies we got. So we got Etherflux, which is beaming the power down to Earth, and this would be for military bases, outposts, and their antenna, their receiver is quite small. I think it's 5 to 10 meters, and it would use infrared, so you wouldn't actually see the beam. It would be infrared. So that's Etherflux. This is what their satellites look like. So obviously very long solar panels to collect a lot of energy, and then you beam it down as an infrared beam. Okay, that's the Etherflux. So this is a much larger system. This is Space Solar, which is a UK space startup, and this is traditional space-based solar power. So you have a gigantic system. I don't know if you can see in the corner here. This little thing here is the International Space Station. This is Burj Khalifa, the largest building in the world, and this is their solar power based satellite, their solar power satellite. And as you can see, it's absolutely enormous. So it collects a lot of energy and then beams it down as microwaves. So it's not optical power beaming, it's not infrared, it's microwaves. So these waves are much longer. The advantage is they go through the atmosphere. They don't care about rain or anything like that. No problem. They can get to the surface. Disadvantage is you need quite large a ground receiver or antenna. These receivers have to be kilometers in length, and it would be an ellipse. I think, as it said, it's something like 6 kilometers by 13 kilometers on the ground to receive this energy. But it can be something like from 50 megawatts up to 600 megawatts from one of these stations, and you'd have 3 of them in orbit, so you could beam down something like 1.8 gigawatts of power. So it's absolutely enormous in size. And you can see there the power satellites, so starting with Merlin around 2030, that would be 400 meters in size and produce 30 megawatts, and you'd require 1 Starship vehicle to launch it and then assemble it in space. But if you go to the Eagle, this is in the 2040s. This would be 1.7 kilometers in length. It would output 600 megawatts of power and would require 8 Starships to launch. So you can see the size, the scale of this system. That's in the 2040s. But basically, you launch everything flat packed, all the solar panels flat packed. You'd have a robot. It would take each solar panel. It would then connect it into the system one at a time, and gradually you'd build this entire system of fixed solar panels with reflectors that can move to focus the sun's energy on the fixed solar panels, and then you beam down the energy in the form of microwaves. That's the plan. And then we have John M. Anderson saying, I have reservations concerning the light beams to power satellites in the dark side of Earth. It will require reprogramming the solar panels orientation tracking system. That actually neatly goes on to, because you're talking about this company, I think. This is Overview Energy, which is going to do exactly what John mentioned. And we have a look. I don't know if we have the slide for that. No. So basically, solar farms don't produce any energy when the sun's below the horizon, or even when the weather's bad. So typically it's 20-25% of the time they're producing power, and the rest is they don't produce anything. So the solution is they have these batteries, battery systems, which are very, very expensive. And when the sun shines, they collect all the energy. Some of it goes to the grid, some of it goes to the battery system. And when it's dark or the weather's bad, they take the energy from the battery system. So if you look at this graphic here, it says no batteries needed. Solar farms typically overbuild 1.5 to 3 times and have expensive battery storage systems. So the idea with Overview Energy is you don't need any ground infrastructure. Basically, the solar panels will just receive the energy. I think it's near infrared energy quite efficiently. No change of hardware, and basically you go from intermittent power to base load power, because there'll always be satellites overhead, so there'll always be beaming power down to your solar farms, so you don't need the batteries, which basically add a lot to the cost of the solar farm. Most of the cost of the solar farm is the battery system. So this is a solution to making solar farms more profitable. And John is saying, I have reservations concerning the light beams to power systems in the dark side of Earth. It will require reprogramming the solar panels orientation tracking system. So I think the tracking system is on the satellite. I assume, basically, that obviously can steer the beam to the client's solar farm. Maybe the orientation of the panels has to be reset at night, so it's optimum for receiving the energy. I don't know. But that's already in. They have the hardware, the actuators to move the panels. So I don't think you need any hardware changes. Unless you have a fixed solar farm panels that don't orientate. I don't know. But anyway, that's their business plan. And actually, if you look at this graphic here, if you look at where they're sending the power, at least initially, you'll notice it's very dry, arid areas. And that is because the signal can be affected by rain or very humid conditions. So you can see they're sending it to Chile and Morocco and Africa and Middle East, because these are very dry areas. I think California as well, maybe. So they understand that the system can be degraded in humid areas where it's raining and so on. So they have a preference for their clients to be in very dry areas. So that is overview energy. Let's see, have I covered everything at this point? What's this video here? Okay, this is Starcatcher. This is a render of their system. So basically you collect the energy from the sun. Okay, we understand now. Let's go past that. Okay, here's one of their satellites that collects all the energy from the sun, and then it beams it to other satellites. So these are your beam directors, and they're beaming the energy down to other satellites, just onto the solar panels. There's no need to change the solar panels. The energy that's received is perfectly compatible with existing client satellites, and they can beam the power to many different satellites, and you have obviously many of these power satellites in space. You have a whole constellation, whole network of these. So that can, basically send a lot of power to other client satellites. So basically you're building a power grid in space for other space satellites or down to Earth, and potentially you can also do that on the moon. I don't know if I have a... So I did have this table. I didn't put it in the video, but basically this gives you an overview. So you've got Mantis space, just come out of stealth. You have Starcatcher, which is more advanced, 2 or 3 years. They're already testing their systems. Overview Energy is specifically focusing on solar farms. Space Solar is a gigantic traditional space-based solar power, hundreds of meters in length and eventually kilometers length, beaming down hundreds of megawatts to very large ground stations. Volta Space is beaming energy down to assets on the moon, so their satellites will orbit the moon and beam power down to rovers, to lunar landers, potentially to habitats as well. And then Etherflux is space to Earth. So basically remote operating centers, military bases, that kind of thing. Quite small amounts of power to begin with, and focusing more on, I think, on the military to begin with, I'd say. So it's laser, it's microwave in the case of Space Solar, or infrared laser. And some of these missions are 2026, Starcatcher 2026, so this year. Most of them are like 2028, and some of them are 2030, and so on. And John saying, normally the client satellite's solar panels orientation is pre-programmed for tracking the sun only. Switching to the beam source on the dark side means coordinating beam provider and client. Yeah, so there'll probably be some software changes at the night. They'll have to redirect the solar panels to point upwards or something for the optimum angle for the satellite, which I guess is like directly upwards. But I think that's just a software change. I don't think you need to make any hardware changes. But I mean, presumably Overview Energy has talked to the solar farm operators, and they can make that change. So in terms of funding, Mantis Space has just come off stealth, so it's 10 million plus, oversubscribed. Starcatcher is 12 plus some NASA funding, small business grants. Overview is 20. Space Solar's got some government grants, still quite small scale, I think. Etherflux is 50 million plus. Volta Space is partnering with iSpace US. So they've got some kind of partnership there to beam power down to their lunar landers. And we saw them with partnering with Intuitive Machines on the Moon Racer vehicle. So potentially they've got quite a few partnerships, Volta Space. So that is the state of play on the orbital power grid. So I think I've covered all of them, more or less. I think there's maybe one or two other space solar startups I've not covered in my channel at all. So maybe I'll get round to those. But that's a good overview, I think. Okay, so let's see if there's any comments. Yeah, I've got some comments. Let's go over those. See what people are saying. So David Lakomsky saying, once again, great video. I just figured that the one thing that I particularly liked on your previous video on the topic was the additional glue vision, the personal take you added to the descriptive overview. So not just the topic in itself, but your hard sci-fi vision on it too. Still, I really enjoy your work. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Yeah, so I do have opinions on various companies, but I kind of generally optimistic and positive about all these companies. And I do think a lot of these companies can succeed because the space sector is exploding with orbital data centers. With a lot of money, you've got NASA going to the moon, you've got Golden Dome. There's just a lot of money and investment and capital going into space at the moment. So I'm quite positive. Assuming these companies can execute and the technology works, I think the future is very bright for space startups. In space, so basically you've got the launch vehicles, you've got in-space operations, the orbital economy, and you've got the moon, which I think is going to get much, much bigger over the next decade. So I kind of cover all those three sectors. And Cavman was saying, sorry I'm late, we'll have to rewind, no problem. So let's go to the second comment. Wingsley is saying space-based solar power and eventually space-based and neutronic fusion power are definitely the future for both space exploration, industrialization, and for society on Earth. The only reason not to pursue SBSP and SBAFP is politics. These highly portable energy systems could help civilization phase out climate change-inducing fossil fuels. They could also open up new frontier opportunities in space. One big question remaining would be this: how efficient will SBSB and SBAFP for beaming power to Earth and Mars? What percentage of the power generated in orbit will actually make it to the ground, to the grid on the ground? The thing is, there's so much energy. Even if the efficiency is quite low, the sun gives you so much energy, it's not a problem, right? I mean, I think it's 144,000 terawatts of energy passes through the Earth-Moon system from the sun. It's just so enormous. Even if you only capture and can convert a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage, you can power the whole of Earth, no problem. So, yeah, I think you're right. And especially with what's happening in the Middle East now, it would be nice if we could just beam power down directly and not have to transport fossil fuels from the Middle East. I'm just saying right now, it would be great if we had those systems in orbit, beaming down clean energy 24/7. So in terms of I don't really know much about space-based neutronic fusion power, although I did cover on this channel Zephyr Power, which are working on a space-based fusion system. And the advantage of putting fusion reactors into space is you don't need the reactor chamber. You basically have a powerful magnetic field which keeps all the reactant, which would be helium, keeps it bounded by the magnetic field, so no reactor chamber, so it's quite lightweight, and you can do fusion reactions in space. So Zephyr fusion, I covered that on this channel, so that would be great if we could have fusion reactors in space. So we have SDOU2NI saying, the whole idea of warships receiving power from orbit is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So he's talking about my saying Etherflux could beam power down to US Navy. He says it's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of the whole. First of all, the whole problem is that this ship cannot move while it's receiving power. Second off, most warships, yes, even though the ones of China, carry anti-satellite weapons, and last time I checked, those satellites have no defenses against such weapons. And third off, most warships already do carry sufficient power generation for their own needs. They would have no need of such. And finally, I don't really think that there's the intended use case of this kind of system. In a naval context, it would be very useful for establishing World War II style air bases on small island chains. In conclusion, in my opinion, this is a system that is very useful for providing power to static installations. It cannot and should not be utilized as a sole means of power for warships. A warship power generation capacity should always be mounted on the warship, and that should always be the case. Okay, so Etherflux, because their receiver is only 5 to 10 meters, and obviously have the tracking technology, you could put a receiver on a ship. So it could be a US Navy ship, it could be a cargo ship, and you could beam power down to the ship. And yes, the ship can move because the satellite can track the ship. So it can work. And one of the team members of Etherflux is from the US Navy. So this is what Etherflux is thinking about. Volta Space also can track rovers as they move and beam power to it. So yes, you can have moving vehicles, moving assets, and you can beam power down to it. So obviously the entire warship would not be powered. This would be additional power. They'd obviously have a power plant and so on. But if you needed additional power, you could beam it down. That's all Etherflux is saying. So all I'm saying is, like, yes, for additional power, you could beam it down from orbit. So that is, that's my response to that. And so Kako Genesis is saying Volta's little power receivers are slick and surprisingly low cost. This seems like a viable business in the near future with realistic tech. No giant space structures or in-space construction needed. Yeah, their light port is 30 centimeters. It's like that length. Less than 2 kilos. And I didn't mention this in the video, but Blue Ghost Mission 2 will have a light port on the lunar lander. So they're going to test it by the light port receiving energy from the sun. It's not much, but they can test that the light port can convert that energy into electrical power. So the next mission from Blue Ghost, which is later this year, should include the light port. And then I think in 2 years, they'll have satellites in orbit around the moon, and they'll be able to beam down power to lunar landers and lunar rovers, and maybe habitats, who knows. So yeah, I think it's very viable. Jim Watchman saying, moving power through outer space. I have commented on lunar solar fields to power everything in orbit by using relays to boost a microwave laser beam. Throwing the microwaves through outer space, there is no loss until going through the Earth's atmosphere, but the microwaves spread out. What sounds better, a mile wide receiver or 2 half-mile receivers? Really, I'm asking because too big either way, in my opinion. Well, I guess we'll see. I mean, we have a range. You have the very small receivers from Etherflux. You have the light port, which is only 30 centimeters from Volta Space. And then you have the kilometer length rectennas from Space Solar, which I think for the UK, they would be 6 kilometers by 13 kilometers. So pretty massive ground receiver. So we'll see, right? We'll see whether that's viable commercially and so on. But when you look at what's happening in the Middle East and not being able to get fossil fuels, it's a big problem for any economy if they can't get power. So if you had a space-based solar power system now, you'd be receiving power directly into the electricity grid, hundreds of megawatts potentially per satellite. So if they've got 3 of those in orbit, you can get 1.8 gigawatts. So that's equivalent to a nuclear power station. And then we have Ham Judo saying these can make sense for lunar. These can make sense for lunar applications because the lunar night lasts for 14 days, and getting batteries to the moon is so expensive that the purchase price doesn't matter. They don't make nearly as much sense on Earth away from the poles. Utility scale battery costs per megawatt hour is dropping by about 20% per year. This compounding cost drop destroys business plans that assume that batteries cost too much or that assume batteries can only store 4 hours of power. Optically beamed power can't go through clouds. If the sunshine can't reach the solar cells due to weather, neither can an optical beam. If batteries and large solar arrays cost less than beaming power from space, then solar farm operators will do that instead of using expensive space lasers. So, yeah, I mean, all good points. But if you look at the graphic from Overview Energy, they're specifically targeting countries that don't have a lot of clouds, like Chile and Morocco and the Middle East and parts of Africa. So those places would benefit straight away. There's not a lot of rain, there's not a lot of humidity. So yeah, they understand that when there's rain, there's clouds, the system doesn't work as well. It still works, it just doesn't work as well. And in terms of batteries massively increase the cost of solar farms. I think it's double, triple, or more just for the battery systems. So it would massively reduce the cost of solar farms if they could just receive power from space. But we'll see whether Overview Energy gets clients and makes money, whether they're profitable. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So that is, I've answered all the comments. I've gone through all the comments. So in terms of next week, I think I am going to do the European space setups. I did the US one this week. So on Monday, Tuesday, I'm going to do the first video for the European startups, launch providers. But I don't think I can do it in one video because it will be a very, very long video, which I don't want to do. So I'm probably going to do a part 1 and part 2. So I'm going to cover all the European credible launch providers in Europe that are working on orbital vehicles. So I'm not going to cover companies that only do engines, for instance. Just like in the US, I didn't cover Ursa Major. So they got to launch a vehicle, an orbital vehicle, and they have to be credible. They have to have funding. So I'll do that for Europe. Probably 2 videos, part 1, part 2. And then maybe I'll circle back to North America because I've got more to say about North American startups and Canadian startups. And then later on, I'll do one in Asia. So that's my plan for next week. And Kako Genesis is saying, I'm behind y'all. Just wanted to point out that Stoke is already using a full flow stage combustion engine for their booster. So that, yeah. I think I mentioned that in the video. It's full flow stage combustion. So that's one thing that's very complicated. They're using 24 engines with an Aerospace-like efficiency. They're using anti-shielding and they're 100% reusable. So they're doing a lot of really cool technology. They're probably the most exciting US space startup, I would say. Launch provider for sure. So it's only 3 tons, but if they can manage high cadence, they can launch multiple times a day. So 3 tons times, 3 times a day is 9 tons or 15 or so. We'll see whether they can get the technology to work, and hopefully they're launching this year or next year, soon anyway. So anyway, that's everything I wanted to say, and I'll be working on the European space startups, the launch companies next week, and probably that'll be 2 videos just so I can go through all of them. And so I'll see you next week, and thank you for watching.